Welcome back to Walking Stories, the California Walks podcast, where we get to listen to community stories and talk about urban planning, design, and how to make our streets safer. I'm Cal Walks Co-Executive Director Kevin Shin.
And I'm Co-Executive Director Miha Babalai. Last month, we heard about Kevin's experience in Washington, D.C., where an obnoxious driver got his comeuppance when he tried to intimidate another driver who was following the rules by allowing pedestrians to cross safely. If you want to listen to that episode, check out the description for the link.
This month, we are back with a new story, this time brought to us by Anar Salayev, Executive Director at BikeSD. Welcome, Anar.
Hey y'all, happy to be here.
Great to have you. So, Anar, before we get to your story, tell us a little bit about BikeSD and the work that you all do to help make it safer for San Diegoans, for people
San
to walk,
Diegans?
bike, San Diegans, for people to walk, bike, and roll in San Diego.
Sure, yeah. So as the executive director of Bike San Diego, I really focus on three core pillars of work, alongside a sea of volunteers as well as two more part-time staff members who do this on top of their full-time jobs. The three things we really focus on being advocacy, being our sort of bread and butter. Programs, things like Bike SD Presents, where we work with influencers and politicians. We bring them into San Diego where they
Mhm.
can tell us about the good work that they're doing and how we can learn from that. And then also outreach. So we do a lot of work with our community leaders as well as business leaders and business association and improvement districts to sort of help them through the transition of making San Diego a more bikeable and livable city for all.
Fantastic. And that's exactly why we love partnering with organizations like yours. In fact, today's story relates to a recent effort that you all undertook to support the daylighting law, which the legislature passed and the governor signed into law back in October of 2023. The law, which is intended to increase visibility of pedestrians and other vulnerable road users for drivers approaching intersections, makes it a ticketable offense to park a car within 20 feet of a stop sign or crosswalk on the approaching side of the street. Daylighting, which 42 other states have already mandated for many years, has proven extremely effective in reducing crashes between cars and vulnerable road users. So, Anar, why don't you share with us your story about the efforts to conduct daylighting and help with daylighting in San Diego?
Sure. So we had been following this statewide legislation for some time, and huge shout out to Alex Lee, who actually represents the Bay Area, where I'm originally from, and or parts of the Bay Area, particularly I think like Fremont, San Jose area, for pushing this forward at the state level. And the second it was passed and then signed by the governor, we regrouped a few of us here in San Diego on like how can we push this forward at the municipal level, and really sort of proactively get ahead of this before it's sort of made state law and now, drivers and San Diegans more generally are being penalized for it. So in tandem, we were already working with some city leaders on AB 43 implementation. So that's around reducing speeds greater than what cities were allowed to do previously, I believe by between 5 and 7 miles per hour, less than what they could have done prior to AB 43 being made law. And, we were working with council members and the mayor's office and the transportation department on sort of how we can slow roll AB 43 implementation. And we kind of started to tack on discussions around AB 413 as well, because, we figured as we're slowing down streets, we should also make not only those streets, but those adjacent to them safer by proactively implementing daylighting measures. And, initially we were just pushing for sort of these curbs to be painted as part of any upcoming projects in the pipeline. We figured, the the workers are already out there. Let's just give them a bucket of paint and sort of get that out of the way too. And, at the same time, also focusing on sort of an education campaign to really inform San Diegans on like what this means, not only in a sense of like, if you park here, you're going to get a ticket, but more importantly, why this is so important to the city and the state as a whole, as far as safety for not only pedestrians and cyclists, but really drivers too, where there are a lot of intersections in San Diego that prior to this bill were obstructed by vehicles, especially if you have, a 5,000 pound sort of Ford F-250 pickup truck blocking an intersection. It makes it really difficult to see any oncoming traffic. So we kind of tacked that on to those conversations early on and sort of tried to plant in their minds some strategy proactively to push this forward at the city level before it was um, started to be enforced. As we're going through some of these conversations with council members, the mayor's office, transportation, and this sort of campaign, I guess it organically became a campaign because we were kind of having these conversations, and we officially launched it on April 2024 at the Cal Bike Summit, which actually took place here in sunny San Diego. And that is our legislation that saves lives campaign, where we're focusing on AB 43 and AB 413. And it was really at that point where we sort of doubled down on these conversations and we started working sort of within our network on trying to pinpoint like intersections that would most benefit from proactive daylighting measures, and then sort of funneling that over to the council members and the transportation department. And as part of this effort, we worked with a coalition of other safe streets advocates within what we have here in San Diego is like a Vision Zero coalition. Some members being BikeSD, the San Diego County Bike Coalition, Circulate San Diego, and Families for Safe Streets San Diego, and sort of really getting their buy-in on this sort of advocacy approach as well. And so, we were doing that. Unfortunately, I think because just so many things were converging around, the last sort of year and a half till now within the city of San Diego. A lot of good things, a lot of really exciting plans, the mobility master plan, the complete streets policy that passed in December 2023. Obviously, these laws, there was a Measure B that passed, which now allows the city to charge for waste management. And so a lot of these things were happening at the same time. And so ultimately, I think AB 43 or 413 rather, didn't get the TLC that it deserved from the city. And I think a lot of San Diegans would agree with that in that even today, it's being enforced. They don't really understand what it means to not be able to park 20 feet from the crosswalk. And so there's sort of this uproar, certainly on Nextdoor and other similar forums where they just don't understand. And, the biggest concern on top of, loss of parking, which is top of mind for everyone, it seems. The next biggest thing is like, okay, fine, it's safe, we get it, but the city could at least have proactively, painted those curbs to make it very clear where you can and can't park. So I think now there's sort of, that, back and forth that's taking place where the city is now finally painting some of these curbs. They are focusing primarily on sort of business districts and those neighborhoods that have just higher pedestrian and bike activity. So places like Uptown San Diego, Mid-City, North Park, places around downtown, and sort of the park neighborhoods around Balboa Park. And they are slowly starting to make their way through those neighborhoods. But I think sort of this transition point is going to be frustrating for all, where drivers don't know where they can park, whether it's on both sides, and at the same time, the city's getting flack for not moving fast enough. So I think eventually, once it's all said and done, maybe in a few years, these daylit parts of the curb will be treated similarly to how people don't park in front of fire hydrants, even
Hmm.
though they may not all be painted red.
Hmm.
But it will certainly take some time to get there. But we are doing our best working with other organizations like Strongtown San Diego on trying to educate the public through flyer distribution. We also did a really exciting sort of tactical urbanism exercise where we got a bunch of volunteers to go around elementary schools in the uptown and mid-city neighborhoods and sort of chalk those curbs red where the city hasn't gotten to them yet. And that's been really cool to see. And, I bike by a lot of these curbs, and even to this day, cars aren't parked there. So they're really
Hmm.
treating it as a fire lane at this point. And, hopefully this is just sort of a stopgap measure until the
Hmm.
city realizes that they've missed those areas and then go in and actually implement red paint. Um, yeah, so that's where we're at today. I'm personally working with some community planning groups to distribute some of this information and the flyers that we have put together with Strongtown San Diego. And so these community planning groups can then sort of spread the word to their neighbors and communities. It's going to be a slow and arduous process, but I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Hmm.
Fantastic. And I think that, to your point, the getting the word out has been one
Hmm.
of the biggest challenges, right? I think a lot of people don't know when new laws are passed and what changes are being made. I know oftentimes, we'll see random news articles show up in news feeds, and sometimes during local news segments, they'll introduce some of the new driving laws. But the reach of those things and the amount of impact that those types of stories have is so minimal. I feel like people don't
Hmm.
really absorb enough information within that. And most people don't have the time, don't have
Hmm.
the energy and the resources to really go and research all the new laws, understand what what the implications are. And it ends up falling on organizations like yours and
Hmm.
ours, community-based organizations, to end up trying to put that information out there because nobody else is really taking the responsibility for that. And even
Hmm.
though it really should be the state's responsibility and really the individual municipal agencies' responsibilities, they haven't really taken that to heart, and it's not something that they are particularly good at in my experience.
Okay, I feel like you described uh, a typical project from start to finish, or like a change where it's like there's a change, there's confusion, there's need for education, and then I think you basically summarized it like it'll take a long time until, it's cemented in the general public's mind. Um, and when you think about it, there's really only one chance most people get to learn driver safety as a young person turning driver's ed. If you're not getting it from there, there isn't any other mechanism in education and in just being a member of society to learn that. So it's even harder now to educate the general public. And you mentioned confusion. It's been drilled into us that red means no park, red means no park, fire hydrant means no park. So now to have people know of a law but have no physical markings of it or, on the ground and having to remember that, I can imagine that it will be very difficult for anyone that isn't in kind of this sphere of ours where they notice things in the built environment that they don't notice things that we notice. And then, just the concept of like, what's 20 feet? That would be so hard for me to figure out while I'm like justly getting like two kids out of the car and did I park far enough? Like, do I need to carry a measuring tape? So, education is key up to the point when they start to paint. But I was mentioning also driver's education that there isn't a mechanism for education. It's like after driver's ed, the mechanism for education is error and ticketing.
Yeah,
You learn by error and when you get caught or you get ticketed, and maybe you tell a few people because you're frustrated and you
right.
didn't know. So maybe like you educated like your household or a couple friends. But it just shows how a lot of that burden of education with these laws and changes that are really they're there for the safety of everyone falls on
Hmm.
small organizations like us. And, you know, we often have regional or local reaches. That doesn't cover people visiting San Diego. That doesn't cover people from foreign countries or out of town or that are not familiar with these rules where it's not implemented. So it's a whole process until the paint actually goes in the ground.
And of course,
Right.
the flip side of that is always, the one time you get away with parking somewhere illegal, all of a sudden you feel like you can do it. And lots of people take that to heart and use that as an excuse when they say, when they go and park somewhere they're not supposed to, they get a ticket and they're like, oh, but the last time. Well, yeah,
I
it
did
doesn't
it.
matter last time. What matters is what is the rule, and if you choose not to follow it. So it is one of those things. It's human nature, right? Like we learn, we're supposed to learn from our mistakes, but then when we're incentivized by our behaviors to defy the laws, um, that also sticks with us.
Yeah, and kind of following up on the comment around like education and really, America makes it incredibly easy for most people to get a driver's license very
Yeah.
early on. And I know in California, I believe the DMV does require at least a written exam being taken every
Hmm.
5 years or something upon license renewal. So I would be interested in seeing on like how soon daylighting is incorporated within that as a question that comes up. And I know, I recently took my renewal written test, and they certainly sort of randomize the questions
Hmm.
for each one. But I would love to see for daylighting to be sort of a required question in every single California driver's license renewal for the next, 5 to 10 years at least, to really sort of instill it
Hmm.
into our psyche. So I'll just be interested in sort of monitoring the DMV's
Hmm.
driver handbook and seeing how soon that comes up.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's a great point for all of the
Hmm.
new laws that get passed, right? I
Hmm.
think anytime there's a new law, there should be a mandatory period when those are required for people to take as a part of the exam. That said, I will say I moved back to California in 2014. I've renewed my driver's license twice since then. I haven't had to take an exam since that first time.
Huh.
I,
So
I've
yeah,
never
it's
had to since
definitely
I was
not five
15.
years.
Wow. Okay. I recently upgraded to a real ID.
Mm.
I'm wondering if it was part of that. I'm not sure, but that's interesting to hear. So yeah, I
Mm.
guess there isn't like a set in stone time
Yeah.
period in which you have to
Yeah.
retake it.
Yeah, there really isn't. And even for older drivers too, right? As folks, sort of if they get older and
Hmm.
sometimes there needs to be sort of more regular
Hmm.
re-education for some of the older folks, there's still no fixed time frame. And in fact, they've switched to a system where a lot of older drivers don't even need to take the exam anymore. They
Yeah.
take the online course,
Hmm.
and I will fully admit to having heard stories of people's kids taking those online courses for them to get them past the threshold. So the system it's a flawed system,
Right.
unfortunately.
Yeah. And I will say on the record that while I did have to take the written exam when I renewed to a real ID, I am a good driver per my insurance company. So it's not that I'm like a terrible driver or something is the reason they made me take it, I think. So I just want to put that out there as well. Um,
Yeah. We'll have to investigate that because I updated my ID and I wasn't asked to take an exam.
yeah, maybe it's just like a random
The
screening like
random
TSA
screening.
does or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Um,
Seems like it.
I want to also add one other thing, I guess, as far as like the political timing of daylighting, and nobody could have controlled or like, certainly foresaw this at the state level, but just the timing of when it went into effect and then sort of San Diego's budget deficit being very sort of vocally pronounced across the airwaves. I think sort of those two pieces of news happening in tandem certainly didn't make it easy for San Diegans to accept this new law, where a
Mhm.
lot of them, again, going back to sort of maybe the lack of education, saw this as a city ordinance,
Mhm.
not a state law. And so a lot of them then took that and interpreted it as the city trying to sort of claw on as much revenue as possible to make up for the deficit. And then inevitably that then sort of spirals into
Mhm.
greater sort of cultural war discourse. But anyway, so I think just the timing of that sort of was unfortunate as well for San Diego's rollout of this policy. But that then sort of touches on just maybe a general misunderstanding of sort of American and state government 101 that maybe a lot of citizens could also have some additional education on, which, I noticed in some of these conversations. So, that was a shame too. But, hopefully the council just passed the fiscal year 26 budget. We'll see if it's approved by the mayor. I know a lot of the cuts that a lot of San Diegans were worried about to parks, to libraries, were thankfully reinstated in this final draft.
Okay.
We'll see what comes of that in practice and sort of politically, and time will tell. But certainly all of this happening at the same time as daylighting and, parking meter fees increasing as well within the city. Just all of these things are coming to a head at once, and that doesn't make it easy, I think, to really get the public aligned on any of these things.
For sure. And with California's state budget, under fire as well, I think we're likely to see sort of a similar situation across the state with a lot of cities. And it certainly doesn't help that there were laws that were certainly passed, or at least the way laws were implemented when it comes to traffic enforcement. There were ways in which they were implemented that really were about making money for some jurisdictions versus actually just trying to help make streets safer for everybody. And so those stories are the ones that stick in people's minds. And I think if cities or just other municipal jurisdictions want to ease people's concerns around that, more transparency around how that money is held, how it's spent, where it can be spent, and what it can be spent on, I think would go a long ways towards making people feel more comfortable with the idea that those funds are really allocated for very specific purposes and maybe ways that give back and contribute back to safety on our streets.
No, I agree. I don't know if Mia want to jump in.
Mhm. Well, I was just going to say that, even though Assembly Bill 413 is intended to improve the visibility of vulnerable road users for drivers, it also can have the same benefit to pedestrians, right? You mentioned earlier, big Ford trucks that are blocking the visibility of a pedestrian on the sidewalk, but also the visibility of the street for the pedestrian. And even though the onerous of this bill is on drivers, it has the added benefit for pedestrians. And I think we don't think of those things until we don't have the access to do that, right? Like if you are used to, having bulb outs, or maybe a city already has, you live in a city where daylighting is common, and you go somewhere else, it isn't until somebody's blocking your view and you have to stretch your neck out into the road or even step out into the road, to be able to see, to cross safely. Um, so a lot of these laws, they have additional benefits to other road users directly or indirectly. And I think this one, there's a lot of benefits that we can think of, besides giving the driver visibility of the pedestrian. But I think in this case, the fact that um, it's removing a single parking space, um, it's designed for drivers' responsibility to look and to give space to those that are working to cross the street. Um, but yeah, in general, I'm just kind of curious. how it was received at the local level in 2023, because it's so weird. I just remember 2023 was the midst of COVID. Like communication was so focused on the pandemic and health, that I think a lot of these discussions on transportation are, like you might be surprised to know that your city maybe has an ordinance or did something during COVID related to daylighting or transportation, because so much of the focus of cities and jurisdictions was on just COVID, and COVID relief and supporting families and businesses around COVID. So there's like a lag in the legislation reaching the general public from that too.
Yeah, I mean, the California legislator, to their credit, and also sometimes maybe not, but they put out so much legislation. There's just so much going out every single legislative season, and so I don't think this was something anyone had really caught wind of when it was first passed. Certainly not anyone that isn't directly involved in the space. I actually remember around that time when we were doing our sort of first rounds of shuttle diplomacy around AB 43 and then eventually AB 413 at like community planning groups. And, I would mention daylighting and a lot of ears would perk up and they'd be like, what's that? Like, is that happening? Like, what? And I'm like, oh, yeah, like that's happening. It's passed, it's coming. And like, and this was sort of community leaders, people
Hmm.
that I would expect to sort of have more insight into these things, and they just had no idea, and sort of certainly not putting any blame on them. It's just so much coming out of the legislator, being signed by
Yeah.
the governor, and on top of that, like you mentioned, Miha, a lot of this was, I'd say, eclipsed by sort of just the greater socioeconomic issues and pandemic related concerns that were sort of flurrying around in the zeitgeist at that time. So, yeah, I don't think anyone saw this coming, and even when it was enforced, people still don't know, So it will definitely take a really long time.
For sure. So, Anara, any parting thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Um, what can I say here? Hmm. Well, I really appreciate the good work that y'all are doing statewide. And, I think there's a lot of momentum within California on pushing forward sort of all ages and abilities infrastructure, not only for biking, but also for
Hmm.
pedestrians, for transit riders. And it's sort of, the moment calls for it. We're seeing people dying on our streets left and right. The sort of climate crisis is looming, and we're sort of heading towards this cliff, not only as a society, but we're now also seeing sort of fiscally that is not a sustainable path forward. And there are sort of small, tiny wins every single day that we're seeing at the city level, at the county level, at the state level. And it's really exciting for us to be a part of this. I think really, there's good work being done. I think our advocacy is materializing into sort of material improvements. I think what we can get better as sort of a cohort of advocates is really sort of reaching quote unquote across the aisle to normies, to people that don't have the time to think about these things because they're worried about getting to work, to making sure they bring put food on the table, to making sure they're caring for their family and friends. And some of these things are just sort of out of their purview. How can we, one, inform them about some of this good work that's being done at the state level, but then also, more importantly, get their buy-in by really conveying the value of a lot
Hmm.
of this work. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people do vote with their wallets. So, now I think as we're seeing sort of just convergence of just the cost of living crisis and all these other things that are maybe more abstract and far away to the average citizen. I'm hoping the silver lining is that this is sort of the storm before the calm, where people will slowly start to realize that this sort of century of car dependency and sprawl isn't all that it was made out to be, and that the American dream was a mere mirage, and there is a better path forward. And so, I'm really excited to kind of see the maybe nascency of some of this. And stoked to see where it goes in the next 5, 10, 20 years, and I'm excited that we're all a part of this together.
Couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
So that is the big hope of our podcast, is to try and bring this to an audience in a way that is more relatable and hopefully is something that people are more willing to accept because it's stories coming from your neighbors, your community, and hearing about it in a way that hopefully makes people think about it
Mhm.
in a different approach from what they're used to. So that's definitely a part of our hope. Well, Anar, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your story with us. Um, we really appreciate you being here. So we'll definitely continue to be in touch, and we'll stay, we'll keep working with you however we can to help continue to bring these types of efforts across the state.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the invite, Kevin and Miha. Keep up the good work, and let's, yeah, continue to stay in touch.
Great. Take
All
care.
right.
Cool.
Take care.
Thanks.
So that daylighting law we discussed, Assembly Bill 413, which passed the legislature and was signed by the governor in 2023, is intended to improve the visibility of vulnerable road users for drivers approaching the intersection. So this is accomplished by removing just approximately one single parking space on the approaching side of the intersection. It creates a better line of sight for drivers to see the corner and anyone walking, biking, strolling, and rolling up to that corner.
This is a time-tested approach that more than 40 other states have already adopted. While different states have different specific details of how they implement daylighting, the basic premise is still the same. Improve the ability for a driver to see vulnerable road users approaching an intersection in order to reduce the potential for a collision. That reduction in potential collisions is going to save many lives.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we need these laws.
Absolutely. Although the way California's iteration of this law was written, it unfortunately places the onus on drivers to know the law, which can be highly problematic, as we discussed with Anar. The fact that I would suspect that if you ask the majority of drivers out on the road today, all over the state, probably less than 1 in 10 could tell you that this law exists, and even fewer could tell you how their specific area has chosen to implement this law.
Yeah, that's right. The specific language for this law is written into California's vehicle code, which are the rules that drivers have to follow when they're driving.
And of course, this approach has the problem that it then becomes up to each jurisdiction's choice of how to enforce the law. That means if a city doesn't make it a priority to issue citations for this, then there is little that communities can do about that.
Yeah, that's really, really problematic.
And even more concerning, the law actually allows different jurisdictions to pass their own local ordinance
Mm,
with varying distances, which means that we have a patchwork of confusing rules as people travel between different
mhm.
areas. And while the law allows for this, it requires that each municipality justify their change with data. We have already heard of some jurisdictions that are violating this by simply declaring shorter daylighting distances without passing proper ordinances or providing the required evidence.
Yeah, and that's why California Walks, in partnership with CalBike, issued our press release at the end of May, calling on all municipalities to step up their efforts to not only enforce daylighting, but to educate their community about the law and the benefits that it could provide.
We believe that more community members deserve the opportunity to learn about this law and be given the chance to comply without receiving citations. Some communities, like Cupertino, have done an above average job of getting the word out, working with youth in their communities to create messaging and deliver that messaging to members of the community.
Yeah, and um, we know that many leaders are going to say, well, we're hearing concerns from people that are worried about parking in their neighborhoods. We're not sympathetic to this concern. There's always concern around parking, especially business districts, downtowns. Um, But we want to point out that the recommendation is 20 feet, which is only a single parking space. And, the trade-off of a single parking space for the ability to prevent severe injury or death to your neighbors is, I think, definitely worth it.
And we really shouldn't wait until tragedy happens before we take action. This is a call to action for all municipal and community leaders. Do not wait until someone pays with their body or their life before you take action. Be proactive and take the preemptive step to prevent the tragedy from happening in the first place. It may be inconvenient, but if we all we all should be willing to make a small sacrifice in our convenience in order to make our community safer for everyone.
Yeah, and if your community hasn't taken the steps to address daylighting or you haven't heard any information from them around daylighting, you can make a known to them and ask them to prioritize it by showing up at city council meetings to make public comment or even writing an email or a letter to your city planning or engineering department. There's different ways that you can let them know that this is a priority for you and your community.
Or as Anar indicated, he and his team took steps to take a non-permanent and non-destructive action to show your city how it can be implemented and that they can do better. If you need help with what to say in a public comment or what to write in your letter, we'll leave some resources below in our description, and you can take advantage of those to help you get the word out and help to get your local leaders to get behind this daylighting law.
Well, thank you all for joining us for this month's Walking Stories podcast. We hope you learned something, are inspired to take action on daylighting in your community. If you need any support, like Kevin mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us at info@calwalks.org.
And you can support our work by visiting calwalks.org/donate or purchasing your very own CalWalks t-shirts at our online store. Links are in the description, or you can visit our store online at calwalks.org/merch store.
And if you have ideas for what you'd like to hear in future episodes of Walking Stories, or if you have a story you'd like to share, just comment below or reach out to us.
And please make sure you comment, like, and subscribe, and share this podcast with a friend, a family member, or a community leader you hope will do better.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your time with us. We look forward to bringing you more walking stories. Until next time.
Thank you, everyone.